So it was 1960, 61. Just, I don't know how to describe it. It was like playing every minute you could. And I was trying to get my stripes. It was this great big band, and I would bring my drums and play half the jam session so Benny could play the second half of the rehearsal on my drums. I would pack my drums and leave, you know. But man, I got to play. It was just like you were just going to school. It was like the kids go to school now, you know. I get there and they're in the room practicing, or they're playing at night. And that's what we were doing. And Joe was, you know, completely encouraging. And imagine I was getting to hang out with the most popular drummer in the world. I mean, he was a big star then because of Take 5, you know. The whole jazz thing was there was drugs, and there was nightlife, and there was this underground current to it, and you got into that. And I went out on the road for like 2 years. Only had enough money for one of us to eat, so one of us would get the big breakfast special, and the other one would like get the toast off of that.
It was fun. It was hard. It was wild. It was grand in every way.
And Morello had always said to me, look, the way it works is you find somebody better than you, and you get them to play with you. So then we got back to San Francisco, and Vince Guaraldi had a hit record, Cast Your Fate to the Wind, and he needed a drummer. It was the dream life. You were getting paid to play jazz. You could stay up all night and play and hang out, and you know, you didn't have to live in the square world in the daytime.
There were those kids out on the road, and now, you know, there's been some arrival, you know.
Vince taught me there was an off and on switch, you know, like you don't sit down and go, I'll warm up, you know, just like 1, 2, 3, 4. Life or death, right then. There's always been these people along the path who would have a profound influence. Fred Marshall, bass player, Fred was just the first guy I guess I met who was just an artist.
When we hooked up with Fred and that whole world, it was another just even more profound change.
Fred and I started playing free. And that was the revelation. People hated that music. I mean, they hated it. Most of the time with Vince, I played the Philly Joe thing, a lot of Philly Joe, you know. Vince didn't want to hear a lot of other stuff. He said, you know, one night he said, look, what I love about you is the thing that makes you play all that shit, but I don't need it. You know, it's like, oh, but that thing is what I want. Vince, you know, he was tough and yelled. And one night there was no more yelling. I didn't want it anymore. And it was more of a feeling of like, okay, I've learned all I need to learn from you. It's time to move on. Denny Zeitlin was looking to put together a trio, and immediately we began exploring a new way to try to play trio. So the trio was Denny and Charlie Hayden on bass and myself on drums.
When I listened to his trio with Denny Zeitlin, Charlie Hayden, there was a special telepathic kind of communication that that kind of goes in this little circle between the three people, and Jerry's contribution to that was, you know, unmistakable and undeniable.
It took us, you know, all over the United States. Newport Jazz Festival, Monterey Jazz Festival, The Tonight Show, you know. Mind-boggling to go to Tonight Show, Johnny Carson, you know, and we played twice. Second time we had to apologize, but.
One night, these musicians came, and turned out to be Jerry and Fred Marshall.
We had met Bill Ham, this light painter, and Frank Werber had put us together to create this thing called Light Sound Dimension, you know, LSD. It was an audio-visual band on one level. It had the band approach I mean, it was like there was no separation.
The thing about Jerry and Fred were that they were, when we met, they were coming from jazz.
San Francisco's music scene was beginning to erupt. I would say with the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane kind of stuff. But there was also, and it's almost completely forgotten, there was a great eruption of kind of a bebopish sort of post-beatnik jazz crowd.
I think around then I was starting to realize that I'm not a musician, that sound artist or an artist. I had never been trained to think of myself as an artist. I was a jazz musician. I started just taking the drum set apart. Started to see the drum set differently. There's this whole explosion, blowing away the preconceptions of the 50s. You know? The music had already taken us there somewhat, and the younger generation was taking that up, but not the people our age were, the people I went to school with. They all had jobs and families and stuff, and the artists were, you know, we'd already heard about that during the beatnik thing a little bit.
Again, my sort of little conventional life was just thrust into this other world, you know, of artists and hippies, for lack of a better word, and it was just another lifestyle altogether.
We played ourselves into a corner. By this time I was 30 years old, and I'd been performing since I was 6 years old. And I was pretty tired, and I didn't have a clue of how to live my life. I knew there had to be a way.
Has always been involved in seeing his musical life as it relates to all artistic activity. And I think that interest, which has always been with him, is like blossoming to wonderful lengths. It's seeing and living a musical life that exists among other artists.